So I have the 9 a.m. slot to talk about open science, everyone's favorite word. So I went through several iterations of this presentation trying to figure out what would be best to present to a bunch of scientists who haven't had coffee at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning. And originally I did have some sort of generic pithy title about how awesome open science is, but I guess we're going to hear more about that throughout the rest of the day. So instead, I decided to be a little bit more provocative and try and figure out why the hell we're all here and why are we discussing all of this stuff today. And in case you weren't aware, we're sort of in the midst of, at the moment, of a sort of global research revolution. Originally, this slide did say a global research crisis, but Daniela later is going to tell you all about how wrong that phrasing is. But things in science actually aren't too good at the moment. Things, in fact, are so bad that a movie was released about it a couple of months ago called Paywall: The Business of Scholarship. If you haven't seen it yet, it's open access. You can watch it online, and I strongly recommend it. But depending on who you speak to these days, there are sort of 4 major crises or revolutions happening at the moment. So the first of these is the access crisis. The fact that most of the research that we have produced as humans is inaccessible to most humans on this planet, which is a dire problem. There's the second one, which is reproducibility, the fact that most sort of analytical research these days fails to pass basic reproducibility tests, and if you consider that reproducibility is one of the core tenets of research, then this is a huge problem. There's the serials crisis, which if you speak to librarians, this is the fact that in the last 20, 30 years, the cost of subscribing to research journals has increased at 300 times the rate of inflation, and is crippling our research libraries and institutes. And finally, evaluation. The evaluation crisis, so the metric that I don't need to tell you all about, and the fact that we use things like journal brand to evaluate the quality of researchers. There are other ones as well, such as copyright, for example, the copyright crisis, but not all of them produce as nice an acronym as the ones which I've done here. So my question to you all, is why are we here? Is hopefully we've heard of these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are the goals that the UN has set to basically save the planet, and it includes things such as having a quality education and affordable and clean energy, solving the biodiversity crisis on land and below water. And so my question to you all is, do you believe that science can help us save the planet? Anyone? Yes? Right, there's a few nods. The answer is yes. But if you believe that science is good for humanity, then you also sort of believe that the way in which we're performing science at the moment, in terms of not providing access and failing to do reproducibility, is also really bad for the planet. And we're not doing ourselves justice, we're not doing the planet justice by the way in which we're conducting and communicating science at the moment. And this is where science comes in. So, open science, sorry. So open science is this sort of ginormous behemoth that is designed to be the solution to all of our problems. When you speak to people, open science means a different thing to different people all around the planet. It can be like the next industrial revolution. It can be, just about, fair data and open standards. But either way, whenever you speak to somebody about open science, it's like, yeah, open science is going to solve the reproducibility crisis. Open science is going to solve the access crisis, and all of these sorts of things. But honestly, I've been doing this for a while now, and I still have absolutely no idea what open science actually is, and I honestly don't think anyone really does. Ironically, if you want to read about the only systematic definition of what open science is, it's being paywalled by everyone's favorite company, Elsevier, so you actually can't even read about what open science is. But the best description of it is this one here on the right-hand side. I don't have a pointer, sorry.
Yes.
But I have this thing, but... Oh, cool. Right, yeah. This one here by a genome biologist called Mick Watson. And he said, open science describes the practice of carrying out scientific research in a completely transparent manner and making the results of that research available to everyone. And he says, isn't that just science? And he's kind of right, in a way. If you're not conducting science and you're not sharing your data and your code and making it reproducible, are you really doing science, or are you just doing something different, maybe creating an advert for research? So if you dig a little bit deeper to the why are we all here sort of thing, And you can go into the fundamental principles that underline open science or open scholarship. And this includes, includes things like inclusivity, responsibility, public good, and equality. And as well as just like human values based on things like freedom, fairness, justice, truth, and liberty. And these things are really important because I think that everyone in this room probably believes that freedom and justice are a good thing. And if these are the principles and values that underpin open science, then why isn't open science the sort of norm? And it gets a little bit more complicated the more you sort of think about these things. So, we have these principles, these principles which I just mentioned about transparency, reproducibility, and accountability. These things really are not the principles of good science, of open science, the principles of good science. And, these values, which are around equity, freedom, and fairness, they're not things that, again, underpin science. They're things that underpin just good people on this planet. And again, I believe that every single person in this room probably believes that equity and freedom are good things and are good people. And if you don't believe that these things are good, then you probably shouldn't be here. I also probably believe that everyone believes that these principles of science are good things too. And therefore, it forms this automatic sort of feedback loop where you automatically believe that the practices of what we call open science or open scholarship are inherent to just doing good science as good people. And it sort of forms this iterative feedback loop. And therefore, open science, I guess, should be the norm, and therefore we can probably stop calling it open science at some point. On a more pragmatic level, so I love this spectrum here so much. So this is what we call the reproducibility spectrum. Most historical research consists of just creating like a PDF of research and smacking that online and saying this is research. This is all sorts of problems, like we heard about yesterday, to do with having public trust in science and all of this sort of thing, as well as the reproducibility crisis, for example. But we can make our work more reproducible by being more open about what we do. So, for example, if you just produce a PDF of your years of research and stick it online, then what you've done is create an advert for your research. It's not really science in a way. If you release the data along with all the sort of metadata standards that are required these days, then it becomes a little bit more reproducible. It's looking a little bit more like science. If you produce the code and release that as well, with a version and a DOI and all of this sort of thing, then you get there. If you can reproduce the entire sort of research environment, for example, using Docker or this sort of thing, then what you have is science. You can click a button and you can reproduce the entire sort of research that goes behind like a discovery. And this is fantastic because we can then start to move beyond science just being anecdote and actually create real, good, rigorous science that everyone can access and everyone can reproduce. So another really big problem in this space is that mega publishers such as Elsevier and Springer Nature are totally corrupting whatever open science is. So hopefully everyone knows who Elsevier and Springer Nature are. Hopefully they also hate them. These are organizations whose primary product was developed in a sort of pre-digital mindset in the 17th century. We still call it a paper. Christ, it's like these people have never heard of the internet. The reason why the open science and open access movement sort of began was to challenge the practices of these private companies because they have business models that are essentially bad for science and have created many of the problems and the crises which I mentioned before. Their business models are based on things like exploitation of the public purse, on exclusion, on knowledge discrimination, and all sorts of bad things. And these companies now, they pay lip service to open science. If you go to Elsevier's website, and if you look at them on like lobbying websites, for example, it now says, Elsevier, partner with the global research community to empower open science. We will lobby on behalf of the open science, community. And it is outrageous that we are letting this happen. We have completely lost the narrative behind openness. And, honestly, it makes me sick. If you go to, these are private companies that are essentially have worse business practices than Google and Facebook, and they are saying that they empower us to do science. And it is absolute nonsense, and they are extracting billions of dollars every year from the public purse and violating the principles and the values which I mentioned before. We do not share them, but the danger of this is that we're completely losing the open narrative at the moment, and we're losing science, sort of as a result of that. So my little solution is what if we all stand together instead of sort of competing with each other instead? So the thing which I guess I wanted to mention is that, like, we need to stand together as a unified global community to make sure that what we're all doing here today and for the rest of our lives is in the best interests of society and the planet. And we're not just sort of investing in the shareholders of Elsevier and Springer Nature as we're doing this. So, there's a hashtag, people, not profits. But, culture change, it's not something which is easy to do. This open science thing, the machine is unstoppable. Like, it's definitely, sort of on everyone's agenda these days. That's why we're all here, I guess. What do we need to change cultures, though? Education is key at the moment. So open science is everywhere, but no one is really teaching it. And that's what we're trying to do with the Open Science MOOC, is do massive scale training, support, and education as a community so that people actually understand what it is that we're talking about when we talk about open science, open access, open data, open source, open principles, open evaluation, all of these sort of critical issues at the moment. And once we begin to educate people better, then we can start to empower people. And this is what we're doing at the moment. We're creating new leaders for the next generation of science. You all, hopefully in this room, will be, the leaders of the next generation. But by training people better in like the values and the principles behind open science, then we can start to shift the power dynamics. Stop these corporations and these professors from abusing the way in which we practice science, and build instead a global community based on the strong values, which I mentioned before, and around sharing and collaboration. So this is the reason why we're all here, the reason to do good science. But the big problem is that what we're trying to fight at the moment is the incentive structure. So, like I said, the impact factor and the journals in which we publish still governs everything. People haven't found a solution to this yet, despite knowing about the problem for about 50 years now. So, for example, just a couple of days ago, there was a paper, preprint published, even, which demonstrated that in the United States and Canada, in 80% of research promotion and tenure guidelines for universities in the United States and Canada, it says that they will evaluate you based on the journal in which you publish or the impact factor of that journal. This is a huge problem, and we haven't managed to overcome it yet, despite knowing about the problem. But like I said, this is one of the things we're trying to challenge at the moment with the Open Science MOOC. We're just a big online community trying to do cool things. The ultimate goal, right? Why are we all here? This is the thing I'm still trying to work out. For me, it's about embracing these principles and these values of being good people and good scientists. And pooling knowledge and resources to create a decentralized scholarly infrastructure, but with people and communities as the focus. And if we sort of have that as the basis for why we're all here, then we can start to achieve this goal of having science as a public good for the betterment of society. And at the moment, we have completely failed that goal as a scientific community, and it's probably something which we need to think about. So, I wanted to be very lighthearted, of course. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, you haven't had coffee yet. I wanted to make it as difficult as possible for the speakers later. So these are the things which sort of keep me up all night, gazing out my window. So is open science even a thing? Like, what is open science? Is open science just good science or just normal science? And is the opposite of it bad science? If you're not being open about your research, is it really even research, or is it just anecdote and an advert? Is open science the solution to challenging proprietary systems? Like I mentioned, Elsevier, Springer Nature, digital science, all of these companies are proprietary. If you look at the reason why the open source movement began, or the free software movement began, it was to challenge the proprietary culture that dominated software at the time. And openness at the moment is being dominated by proprietary companies, or proprietary systems, which is a little bit weird. To what extent does open science intersect with feminism? This is something which came up a couple of days ago at a conference. If we're talking about things like equity, diversity, and inclusion, these are the things that underpin the feminist movement, which hopefully, again, we're all feminists in this room, and therefore is open science part of the feminist movement? It's just a really interesting thing to consider. How does open science fit into the wider sort of open movement? At the moment, open science is not an isolated bubble, but we are treating it like that. And in fact, there's a huge sort of revolution happening outside of science at the moment around like open government, open source, open education, and open textbooks, open corporates. All of these movements are happening within the sort of open culture space at the moment. And to what extent do we overlap or integrate with those? Another one is open science anti-capitalistic? this is a brilliant one. So we heard yesterday from the final speaker that one of the defining norms of scientific culture is communalism or communism, because it's about, you know, sharing and things, and open science shares the same principles. Is open science communistic and therefore anti-capitalistic? And depending on who you speak to, you will either get punched in the face or people agreeing with you very heartily that it is in some sense communistic. But the sort of two most important ones, I guess, are what is the end goal of open science? You know, why are we all here? Why are the speakers going to be telling you about open science is the greatest thing ever later on today? And what are the things that we all share? What defines what science is? What defines what this community is? What defines openness? What defines humans? And therefore, what is open science all about? And hopefully the speakers now will have a very difficult time telling you the answers to these problems for the rest of the day. So that's it. Good luck.